We have with us a very diverse panel of inspiring speakers. Nobel Peace Laureate Kailash Satyarthi, Gaurav Gupta from Dalberg, Anita Bhatia, Deputy Executive Director from UN Women. I would like to invite Gaurav to introduce the session as well as Kailash Satyarthi. Gaurav is the Asia Director of Dalberg Advisors. He advises clients on how to maximize social impact. Gaurav, over to you for what promises to be a really interesting session.
Totally agree, and thanks so much for that intro. I'll make it quick because Mr. Satyarthi's time is precious. So I just want to say that this session, all of you will have attended many of the other sessions today and seen that one of the common themes across that is that this crisis is really making existing disparities, inequalities, even more so. It has exacerbated the challenges that many were facing already. And we're very fortunate to have a discussion today around how to address those existing and new vulnerabilities that have come up. And to really frame that discussion, there is no better person that I can think of than Mr. Kailash Satyarthi, who's internationally acclaimed child rights activist, has been a tireless advocate of children's rights for 4 decades now. And his interventions have now spread over to 140 countries in his endeavor to protect children from slavery, trafficking, forced labor, sexual abuse. For his unrelenting efforts in this space, as I think many of you know, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2014. So let us hear from him in framing how it is that we can really tackle this current crisis with compassion, keeping the most vulnerable in mind. Mr. Satyarthi, over to you.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Of course, we are all passing through the most unprecedented, the most extraordinary situation. And it is not simply a health crisis or economic crisis. It's also a serious humanitarian crisis and development crisis. I can even go beyond seeing that it's also a crisis of civilization. Because the new normals, new priorities, new politics, new economy will shape a new kind of civilization. And I'm afraid that the most marginalized and vulnerable sections of society must not be further marginalized and excluded and left out. We begin our morning with some of the most depressing and challenging news, as well as some of the promising and inspiring stories as well. Today, I think in 2 or 3 different places, about 15 migrant workers who were trying to return home were crushed by the trucks or met with some other accident and died. It is the situation of many people in many places across the world. When I'm trying to speak on the issue of compassionate economy, I would begin with a very simple way of explaining it, and that is Mahatma Gandhi's talisman to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India. When asked by Nehru, Mahatma Gandhi said that if you are going to formulate or frame a policy or making any decision, make sure that the last person of society, the poorest of the poor you have ever seen in your life, should feel comfortable, should feel smiling, and be protected. So the economic policies and the political decisions must be guided and driven by the well-being of the last person of society. I'm not using compassion as a religious or spiritual connotation. It is something which is needed in politics, in society, in religions, and economy as well. It is not just sympathy to be sympathetic for others, neither it's empathy. Sympathy when you feel the suffering of others and have some concern. And empathy is much more deeper. That is feeling for the suffering of others as your own suffering. But the nucleus or the solution lies in compassion, means when you feel the suffering of others as your own suffering, with a desire and drive to act, to elevate that suffering, to end that suffering, makes you a compassionate person. And in terms of economy, if we are able to imbibe this value of compassion in making our economic decisions now, it would not only help in addressing the humanitarian crisis and the crisis of civilization, but it will also help in ensuring that the inclusive development does not fall off track. I was the part of the discussions and negotiations while the Sustainable Development Goals were being framed. And they are not simply the guiding principles. They are not simply the pieces of paper. They have a very strong resolve and commitment of the international community to sustain people, planet, prosperity, and peace altogether. And the most important is that it has two strong elements. One is the economic imperative of development. Means if you are going to invest in education, health, if you're going to invest in stopping child marriages or violence against children, if you are going to address the problems of marginalized and indigenous people, then it has its own economic gain. So investment in development has a very clear economic gain and economic return. And the second important factor in SDGs is in a strong imperative of human rights. That was not the case in Millennium Development Goals. And when we talk of human rights, they are again not simply some sort of preaching or guiding principles. They are achievable goals. They are achievable commitments which we have made over the years, and we have learned out of several disasters and difficulties and catastrophes to protect the human rights as the part of humanity and dignity of human beings. So we have been working and raising this issue that the most marginalized sections of society and even in the world must not be left out in this crisis as well as the post-COVID-19 era. When we see in the newspapers, about a few weeks ago, I was highly, highly anguished and I would say disturbed while watching that a young girl, 12-year-old girl, Jamilo, was walking on feet 150 kilometers from Telangana to Chhattisgarh to return desperately to her home. She fell down and died on the spot. She was trafficked. She was held in bondage. She was working as child laborers in other state. And when she was returning, she had no money. We failed a child and we failed millions of children in the world now and also in the past. We are not able to ensure that children are not trafficked, children are not held in slavery and not fall out of schools and become wage earners in their early ages of 10 or 12. She died of hunger and thirst. This is not just one example. 16 people, 16 workers, daily wage earners or migrant workers were returning, and they were crushed by a running train on the railway track. We come across examples that how in the United States of America, 1 out of 5 children or 1 out of 6 children are not able to get enough food in these situations. The food packets or the grocery and other facilities are not made available to those children. Children and men and women with disabilities, or what we call special abilities, across the globe are suffering quite a lot. Girls and women who were forced to the flash trade or commercial sexual exploitation, hundreds of thousands of them are now on roads and facing hunger and difficulties. There was a situation in on the streets of Bangkok when the government was announcing some stipend or some financial assistance to the daily wage earners and workers. These women had no identity and no record, no registration, so they were suffering. We are also talking about 300 million primary school going children who were highly dependent on midday meal schemes, conditional cash transfer schemes, and these schemes were linked with their attendance, school attendance. Their poor parents were highly dependent. So hundreds of millions of such parents and such children are facing serious crisis due to this situation. We all knew that if we invest $1 in education, then the return would be $20. We all know that when we spend $1 in eradication of child labor, then the return in next 20 years would be $7. These are the researches done by the UNESCO, World Bank, and ILOs. So we have concrete data that every single year of schooling in a developing countries will help with an increase or will enhance the GDP by 0.34% a year. So if a child goes to school, or every child of that country go to school for 10 years, then the GDP growth would be almost 4% higher than the existing. So these are strong economic imperatives, and we are losing the sight from that. So, dear friends, we, in our own situations, those who are helping people, they must not forget that if we are not able to protect such vulnerable children across the globe, we are not going to protect humanity. We will not justice to ourselves and our generations. We are going to lose the entire generation if we are not going to put additional efforts in saving those children, their education, their health, and their well-being, their rights as well. I would add here that in close cooperation and association with a number of Nobel laureates, not from peace, but from all other disciplines, as well as some of the moral leaders, including the former presidents and prime ministers and head of the states in different parts of the world, are united to raise this voice of vulnerable children. And one of our core demands to the countries as well as to G20 that the $5 trillion or $5 trillion plus dollars which are allocated as the emergency fund now, 20% of it means 1 billion must go to the 20% people of the lowest strata of society. So 20% for those 20% people must be allocated. And this is good enough. This $1 trillion can save the lives of 10 million people in next 2 years. In next 2 years, it will help in, or it will result in cancellation or equivalent to the cancellation of 2 years of debt for the least developing countries or lower income countries. It will also be sufficient to fund 2 years of global gap to meet SDGs related to health and education, water and sanitation, this $1 trillion. So we are demanding that this 20% of the money should go to 20% most marginalized people of the world. I hope that everybody would be able to do his or her bit, keeping in mind that these are all our children. Jamlo was our children. Children working in the mines in Sudan and gold mines in South Africa are our children. The children who are pushed on the streets are our children. The children who are locked and their employers have run away from premises, workplaces, factories, and mines are our children. So we have to protect our children. There was a story which comes to my mind in half a minute, is that there was a heavy fire broken out in jungle. All animals were rushing for a better place, leaving the jungle, including King Lion. And Lion noticed that there was a tiny hummingbird rushing towards the fire. She was flying towards the fire. Surprisingly, Lion asked, "What are you doing, committing suicide?" She said, "No, sir. I am going to extinguish this fire." "How come?" he asked. And she replied, "Sir, I was born and grew up in this jungle. I'm not going to leave it like that. I am doing my bit." Dear sisters and brothers, do your bit for children. They are all our children. They are all our children. Thank you so much.